The wedding ceremony lasted 12 hours. Danny stood in robes made of fabric that moved on its own, surrounded by 10,000 Volanti who watched him like he was an animal in a zoo. The rituals made no sense to him. He drank liquids that burned his throat. He repeated words in a language he barely understood. He let alien priests paint symbols on his skin that glowed faintly in the palace lights. Through it all, Queen Zyrith Kai stood beside him. She never looked tired. She never showed any emotion at all. When the final words were spoken and the ceremony ended, she simply turned and walked away, leaving Danny alone in the great hall while servants rushed to clean up around him. This was his life now. Husband to a queen who saw him as a political tool. Resident of a palace filled with creatures who thought humans were barely worth noticing. Alone on a planet 40 light-years from home, Danny got to work. The first week, he focused on language. The Volanti spoke with sounds that human throats struggled to make, but Danny practiced until his voice was raw. He listened to every conversation he could. He memorized words and phrases. By the end of the week, he could understand most of what was said around him. By the end of the second week, he could respond. The courtiers noticed. They whispered about the strange human who learned so quickly. Some thought he had been trained as a spy. Others thought humans were simply good at copying, like clever animals. None of them guessed the truth. Danny's ability let him do more than just touch machines. When he interfaced with the palace systems, he could access their teaching programs, their databases, their entire collected knowledge. He downloaded language lessons directly into his understanding while he slept. He absorbed information about Volanti history, politics, and culture faster than any normal student could. Queen Zyrith Kai summoned him to her private chambers, exactly 1 month after the wedding. It was the first time they had been truly alone together. Her rooms were vast and filled with strange plants that glowed softly in the darkness. She stood by a window that looked out over the endless city. "You have been busy," she said without turning around. Danny stood near the door, keeping his posture respectful but not afraid. "I want to understand your people, your majesty. How can I serve my role if I know nothing about where I am?" Zyrith Kai turned then. Her compound eyes caught the light from the city below, making them shine like scattered diamonds. "You have learned our language in weeks. Our scholars study for years to master the ancient forms you now speak. You have memorized the names and positions of 200 courtiers. You ask questions about our ships, our networks, our defensive systems." She moved closer, and Danny forced himself not to step back. "You are not just learning to fit in, little human. You are studying us. Why?" Danny chose his words carefully. "Because knowledge is the only power I have here. I am small. I am weak by your standards. I will never live as long as you. But I can learn. I can understand. And maybe, if I understand enough, I can actually be useful." The queen studied him for a long moment. Danny could not read her expression. Her face was not built for human emotions. "You are lying," she said finally. "Not completely, but there is more to you than you are showing." Danny smiled slightly. "Isn't there always more to everyone?" Something changed in Zyrith Kai's posture. She almost seemed amused. "Careful, little human. I have killed for less than that. But you won't kill me," Danny said. "I'm too interesting." The queen made that layered sound that served as Volanti laughter. "You are bold. I will give you that. Very well. Keep your secrets for now. But know that I am watching you. Every moment. Every move. Nothing happens in this palace without my knowledge." After she dismissed him, Danny walked back to his chambers through the winding hallways of the palace. Guards stood at every corner. Servants rushed past with their eyes down. Everyone had a place. Everyone had a role, except Danny. He existed in a strange space between prisoner and royalty. He could go almost anywhere, but he was never truly free. He could ask almost any question, but the answers were always incomplete. Late at night, when the palace grew quiet, Danny would press his palm against the wall of his room and let his mind drift into the networks. He moved like a ghost through their systems. He learned the locations of their defense stations. He mapped their communication pathways. He discovered weaknesses that their own engineers had missed. He also found something unexpected. The Volanthi were afraid, not of humans. Humans were a nuisance, a minor enemy that had simply refused to die. No, the Volanthi feared something else. Something out in the dark spaces between stars. Danny found references to the Kethmer in old military files. A warrior species that traveled in massive fleets, destroying everything in their path. The Volanthi had fought them centuries ago and barely survived. And according to recent intelligence reports, the Kethmer were moving again. Danny sat with this knowledge in the darkness of his room. The Volanthi Empire was preparing for a war that might destroy them. They had made peace with humanity not out of kindness, but because they couldn't afford to fight on two fronts. The marriage, the ceremony, all of it was just a way to free up resources for the real battle ahead. They had taken him as a symbol of human surrender. But if the Kethmer came, if the Volanthi fell, humanity would be next. Danny realized he had a choice. He could stay hidden, gather information, and wait for orders from Earth. Or he could do something more. Something that might change everything. He thought about Admiral Vance and her careful plans. He thought about the quiet life he had left behind. He thought about Queen Zarethkai and her ancient, watching eyes. Then he smiled in the darkness and began to plan. The Queen was right about one thing. She had no idea what had walked through her doors. But she was about to find out. The war had lasted 19 years. 19 years of burning colonies, shattered fleets, and countless deaths on both sides. Humanity had never faced an enemy like the Volanthi Empire. Their ships were faster. Their weapons were stronger. Their technology was centuries ahead of anything Earth could build. And yet, somehow, humans kept fighting. Danny Carter was 27 years old when the message arrived from the stars. He sat at his desk in a basement office, surrounded by screens filled with numbers and battle reports. His job was simple. He studied enemy movements. He found patterns. He wrote reports that nobody important ever read. It was boring work, but Danny didn't mind. He had learned long ago that being invisible was safer than being noticed. The news spread through the military base like fire. The Volanthi High Queen wanted peace. After 19 years of war, she was offering to stop the killing. But there was a condition. She wanted a human male to become her consort. A husband, in human terms. A symbol of unity between two species that had spent nearly 2 decades trying to destroy each other. Danny didn't think much about it at first. He was nobody. Just a quiet analyst from Kansas City with no family connections and no special rank. The politicians would choose someone important. A general's son, maybe. Or some diplomat with a famous name. He was wrong. 3 days later, 2 officers in crisp uniforms appeared at his door. They told him to pack his things. They told him he had been selected. Danny asked why, and they said nothing. They just waited while he filled a single bag with everything he owned. Admiral Lisa Vance met him in a private room on the top floor of the command building. She was a tall woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many battles. She closed the door and looked at Danny for a long moment before speaking. "You know why you're really here," she said. It wasn't a question. Danny nodded slowly. He had always known, even if nobody talked about it. When he was 12 years old, doctors had discovered something strange in his brain. A mutation. Something in his genes that let him connect with machines in ways that shouldn't be possible. He could touch a computer and feel it thinking. He could reach into networks and move through them like water through pipes. The military had found him when he was 16 and buried him in classified files ever since. "The Volanthi don't know what you can do," Admiral Vance said. "They think they're getting a pet, a weak little human to show off at their court. They have no idea what they're really bringing into their empire." Danny understood. He was not a peace offering. He was a weapon wrapped in soft packaging. If something went wrong, if the peace failed, he would already be inside their systems, inside their world. What if the peace holds? Danny asked. Admiral Vance almost smiled. "Then you get to live in a palace and marry a queen." Not a bad deal for a kid from Kansas. The journey to Volanthi space took 3 weeks. Danny traveled alone on an alien ship, surrounded by creatures that looked at him the way humans might look at a strange insect. The Volanthi were tall, nearly 9 feet, with hard shells that covered their bodies like armor. They had 4 arms and faces with large compound eyes that reflected light in strange colors. They did not speak to him. They simply watched. Danny spent most of the journey in his small cabin, pressing his palm against the walls and learning. The ship's systems whispered to him in languages he didn't understand at first. But slowly, piece by piece, he began to figure them out. By the time they reached Volanthos Prime, he knew more about Volanthi technology than most of their own engineers. The planet took his breath away. Massive cities stretched across continents, filled with towers that seemed to grow from the ground like living things. Everything was connected. Everything was alive with energy and information. Danny could feel it humming through the air, calling to that strange part of his brain that had always set him apart. They brought him to the palace, a structure so large it had its own weather system. Thousands of Volanthi filled the great halls, and all of them stopped to stare at the small human walking among them. Danny kept his head up and his face calm. He had learned long ago that showing fear only invited attack. Queen Zyrithkai waited for him on a throne made of something that looked like black glass. She was beautiful in a terrifying way. Her shell shimmered with colors that shifted as she moved. Her eyes held intelligence that felt ancient and deep. She had ruled her empire for over 300 years. She had crushed rebellions, conquered worlds, and commanded fleets that darkened the skies of 100 planets. And now she watched a 20-7-year-old human from Kansas City walk toward her without trembling. "You are smaller than I expected," she said. Her voice was deep and layered, like many sounds speaking at once. "I get that a lot," Danny replied. A murmur ran through the court. No one spoke to the queen so casually. Guards shifted their weapons. Advisors exchanged worried glances. But Zyrithkai made a sound that might have been laughter. She leaned forward on her throne and studied Danny with those endless compound eyes. "You are either very brave or very foolish, little human." Danny met her gaze without flinching. "Probably both, Your Majesty." The queen was silent for a long moment. Then she rose from her throne and descended the steps until she stood directly in front of him. She towered over Danny, blocking out the light. "The marriage will take place in 3 days," she said. "Until then, you will be shown to your chambers. You will learn our customs. You will learn your place." Danny nodded politely. "I'm a fast learner." As guards led him away, Danny let his fingers brush against a control panel on the wall. Just for a moment. Just long enough to feel the entire palace network open up before him like a flower blooming in his mind. He smiled to himself as he walked. The Volanthi thought they had taken a hostage. They thought they had claimed a symbol of human weakness. They had no idea what they had actually let through their doors. The game had begun, and Danny Carter intended to win. The attack came 6 months after the wedding. Danny was eating breakfast in his chambers when the palace alarms began to scream. The sound was unlike anything he had ever heard. Deep and pulsing, it made his bones shake. Through the window, he could see ships rising from the city below, rushing toward the sky like frightened birds. Servants burst into his room and told him to stay inside. Guards sealed his door from the outside. For 3 hours, Danny sat alone while the world fell apart around him. He pressed his palm to the wall and watched through the palace networks as report after report came flooding in. The Kethma had arrived. They hit both human and Volanthi space at the same time. 12 human colonies went silent within the first hour. The messages just stopped. Ships sent to investigate found nothing but debris and ash. In Volanthi territory, an entire frontier sector fell in less than a day. Military bases that had stood for centuries were torn apart like paper. The Kethmer fleet numbered in the tens of thousands. Their ships were massive and ugly, built for one purpose only: destruction. They did not negotiate. They did not take prisoners. They simply erased everything in their path. By evening, Queen HFY had called an emergency war council. Danny was surprised when guards came to his room and escorted him to the great chamber. He was even more surprised when they led him inside and pointed to a small chair in the corner. The queen had invited him to watch. Perhaps she wanted him to see how powerful her empire truly was. Perhaps she simply wanted him close in case humanity tried to take advantage of the chaos. The war chamber was filled with the greatest military minds of the Volanthi Empire. Admirals in polished armor, generals with scars from ancient battles, scientists who had built weapons capable of destroying entire worlds. They argued and shouted while holographic maps showed the spreading disaster. The problem was simple and terrible. The Kethmer had somehow obtained technology that disrupted Volanthi communication networks. Every time the fleet tried to coordinate, their signals dissolved into noise. Ships couldn't talk to each other. Commanders couldn't receive orders. The great Volanthi military machine had been blinded. One by one, the admirals admitted they had no solution. The scientists said they needed months to develop countermeasures. Months they didn't have. The Kethmer were moving fast, and nothing could stop them. Danny sat in his corner and listened. He watched the maps update with new losses. He heard the fear hiding beneath the proud voices of ancient warriors. And slowly, carefully, he made a decision. He stood up. The room went quiet. Every compound eye turned to look at the small human who had dared to interrupt. Queen HFY raised one hand to stop the guards who moved toward him. "You have something to say, little human?" Danny walked forward until he stood in the center of the room, surrounded by generals and admirals who could crush him with a single blow. His heart was pounding, but he kept his voice steady. "I can fix your communications," he said. "I can restore your networks. I can do more than that. I can turn the Kethmer disruption technology against them." Silence stretched through the chamber. Then one of the admirals laughed. It was a harsh, clicking sound. Others joined in. The idea that a human, this small, soft creature, could solve a problem that had defeated their greatest minds was too absurd to take seriously. But Queen HFY did not laugh. She leaned forward on her throne and studied Danny with those endless eyes. "How?" she asked. Danny didn't answer with words. Instead, he walked to the central command console, a massive pillar of crystal and metal that controlled everything in the war chamber. He placed both hands flat against its surface, and then he let go. Energy rushed through him, like a river bursting through a dam. His eyes blazed with light that spilled out into the room. The console flickered, then blazed brighter than it ever had before. Every screen in the chamber went white, then cleared to show data streaming faster than anyone could read. Danny was inside the system. He was everywhere at once. He could feel every ship in the Volanthi fleet, every communication hub, every defensive station. He could see the Kethmer disruption signal like a dark stain spreading through the networks. And he could see how to stop it. The admirals had stumbled backward in shock. Guards raised their weapons. But the Queen stood and walked toward Danny with wonder on her face. "What are you?" she whispered. Danny's voice came from the console speakers, from every screen in the room, echoing with strange harmonics. "I am what humans become when we have no other choice. I am adaptation. I am survival." He reached through the networks and began to work. The disruption signal was clever, designed to overwhelm Volanti systems with noise. But Danny didn't try to block it. Instead, he absorbed it, filtered it, and turned it into a map. Every Kethmer ship that transmitted the signal was now visible to him. He could see their entire fleet. "I'm sending new encryption protocols to every ship in your fleet," Danny said. His physical body stood motionless at the console, but his mind was spread across light years. "I'm also sharing targeting data. The Kethmer don't know it, but they just told us exactly where they are." One of the admirals checked his personal display. His compound eyes went wide. "It's working. The fleet can communicate again." Danny pulled his hands away from the console. The light faded from his eyes, and he staggered slightly before catching himself. Every Volanti in the room was staring at him with a mixture of fear and awe. Queen Zyrithkai stood directly in front of him. She was so close he could see his own reflection in her eyes. "The marriage was never about peace," she said slowly. "Humanity sent you here on purpose. They placed a weapon in my palace." Danny met her gaze without fear. "Yes, but right now, I'm the only thing that can save both our people. So the question is simple. Do you want to punish me, or do you want to win this war?" The Queen was silent for a long moment. Then she turned to her admirals. "Give him whatever he needs," she commanded. "The human speaks with my authority now." Danny allowed himself a small smile. The real work was just beginning. The war against the Kethmer lasted another 18 months after the Battle of the Shriven Nebula. But the outcome was never really in doubt after that day. The enemy had learned to fear the strange alliance between humans and Volanti. They had learned that there was something dangerous about these soft little creatures from the blue planet. Something that could not be measured by size or strength, or the length of a life. Danny continued to serve as the bridge between both fleets. He spent his days moving between war rooms and command centers, translating not just languages, but entire ways of thinking. Humans planned in quick bursts, always ready to change direction. Volanti planned in long arcs, building strategies that unfolded over years. Danny learned to speak both languages fluently and slowly. The two species learned to trust each other. There were more battles. Some were victories. Some were painful losses. Danny watched good soldiers die on both sides, and each death weighed on him like a stone added to a heavy bag. But he kept going. There was no other choice. The final Kethmer warlord sued for peace on a cold morning 18 months after the war began. Danny stood in the great hall of the Volanti Palace, wearing robes that marked him as both human and Volanti royalty. Beside him stood Commander Torres and Admiral Vance, who had traveled from Earth to witness the moment. Across from them stood Queen Zyrithkai and her highest admirals. And between them knelt the Kethmer warlord, a creature of scales and teeth that had terrorized the galaxy for centuries. Danny negotiated the peace terms himself. He spoke in 3 languages, switching between human, Volanti, and Kethmer without pause. The warlord would surrender his fleet. His people would retreat to their home systems and never threaten the alliance again. In exchange, they would be allowed to live. When it was done, when the treaties were signed and the enemy had been escorted away, Danny felt something strange. For the first time in nearly 2 years, there was nothing urgent to do. No battles to plan. No systems to fix. No lives hanging on his next decision. The weight that had pressed on his chest for so long suddenly lifted, and he didn't know what to do without it. 3 days later. Queen Zyrith Kai summoned him to her private chambers. The room was different now. During the war, it had been filled with screens and maps and the constant hum of information. Now it was quiet. The strange glowing plants had grown larger, filling the space with soft light. The queen stood by the window, looking out at a city that was finally at peace. Danny entered and waited. He had learned her rhythms by now. She would speak when she was ready. "The court expects me to execute you," she said finally. Danny nodded. He had expected this conversation. "I know too much. I've been inside your systems, seen your secrets. I'm a threat. You are more than a threat." Zyrith Kai turned to face him. "You are proof that we underestimated humanity. If I let you return to Earth, you will teach them everything you learned. You will make them stronger. In 100 years, maybe 200, they might become more powerful than us." "That's possible," Danny admitted. "It would be wise to kill you now," the queen continued, "before you can share what you know, before humanity can grow." Danny met her gaze without fear. After everything they had been through, he couldn't find it in himself to be afraid of her anymore. "So why haven't you?" Zyrith Kai was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer than he had ever heard it. "Because I do not want to." She moved closer until she stood directly in front of him. This close, he could see the individual facets of her compound eyes, each one reflecting a tiny image of his own face. "I am offering you a choice," she said. "You can return to Earth. You will be a hero. Your people will celebrate you as the one who bridged two civilizations and saved humanity from destruction. You will live out your short life in comfort and fame. Or," Danny asked, "or you stay here, with me, not as a symbol or a political tool, but as what you have truly become. A partner, an equal, someone I trust to tell me the truth, even when I do not want to hear it." Danny had thought about this moment many times. He had imagined returning home, seeing Earth again, walking under a blue sky instead of alien stars. He had family there, distant cousins he barely knew. He had memories of a childhood that felt like it belonged to someone else, but that Danny was gone. The war had changed him. His connection to machines had grown stronger, deeper. He understood things now that no human mind had ever understood before. He had watched aliens bleed and die defending human ships. He had held Velanti hands while their owners passed into death. He had become something new, something that didn't quite fit anywhere except here. Except with her. What would staying mean? He asked. Really mean? Zyrith Kai's expression shifted in ways that human faces could not. But Danny had learned to read her. He saw uncertainty there, vulnerability, things she had probably not felt in centuries. It would mean that the marriage that began as a lie becomes something true, she said. It would mean building something together, showing both our peoples that enemies can become more than allies. They can become family. Danny thought about it. He thought about Kansas City and basement offices and a life that had never fit him. He thought about Admiral Vance and her plans that had worked better than anyone expected. He thought about the ships and the battles and the bodies floating in the cold void of space. And he thought about Zyrith Kai, ancient and terrible and beautiful. A queen who had ruled for 3 centuries and had never once admitted she was lonely until this moment. I'll stay, he said. Relief flickered across her face. There and gone so fast that anyone else would have missed it. You are certain? Danny smiled. I've been certain for a while. I just wanted to hear you ask. Zyrith Kai made that layered sound of laughter that he had grown to love. You are still bold, little human. I learned from the best, Danny replied. They stood together by the window, watching the sun set over a city of crystal and light. Outside, somewhere among the stars, humans and Volanti worked together to rebuild what war had destroyed. The future was uncertain. There would be new challenges, new enemies, new problems to solve. But for now, in this quiet moment, there was peace. Real peace, not the kind built on lies and fear, but the kind built on understanding and respect and something that might, in time, become love. Danny Carter had walked into an empire alone, carrying nothing but secrets and the weight of his people's survival. He had faced an ancient queen, fought an impossible war, and changed the fate of the galaxy. Now he stood beside that queen as an equal, watching the stars come out one by one. And across the universe, both humans and Volanthi told stories of the quiet young man who proved that strength came in many forms. That being small did not mean being weak, that the shortest lives could leave the longest shadows. The war was over. The future was beginning. And Danny Carter, once nobody special, was exactly where he belonged. For 72 hours, Danny did not sleep. He stood at the heart of the Volanthi war network, his hands pressed against the central console, his mind stretched across the stars. Servants brought him water and food that he barely touched. Medics monitored his vital signs and shook their heads in disbelief. His body should have collapsed from exhaustion, but somehow he kept going. He was rewriting everything. The Volanthi communication systems had been built over centuries, layer upon layer of code and protocol. Danny tore through it all and rebuilt it from the ground up. He created encryption that the Kethmer could never crack. He'd built prediction programs that tracked enemy movements and guessed where they would strike next. He optimized weapon systems that their own engineers had spent generations developing. The Volanthi watched him work with growing amazement. This small creature from a young species was doing in hours what their scientists could not do in years. Some began to whisper that he was not fully human. Others wondered if all humans were capable of such things, and the Volanthi had simply never known. Queen Zareth-Kai watched most of all. She rarely left the war chamber now, sitting on a smaller throne that had been brought in for her. Her compound eyes never left Danny. She was seeing something she had never expected to see. She was seeing humanity unleashed. On the third day, a message arrived from Earth. Commander Ryan Torres appeared on the main screen, his face tired but determined. He was the officer assigned to coordinate with Danny, the connection between human and Volanthi forces. "We're ready," Torres said. "Earth Command has agreed to a joint operation. Our fleet is waiting for instructions." Danny opened his eyes for the first time in hours. They glowed faintly, traces of light still flickering in his pupils. "Good. I'm sending battle plans now. Human ships are fast and good at hit and run attacks. Volanthi ships are slow but heavily armed. Alone, we both lose. Together, we become something new." He shared his vision with both fleets. Human ships would strike first, fast and aggressive, drawing the Kethmer into pursuit. Then they would pull back, leading the enemy directly into Volanthi firing lines. The trap would close, and the Kethmer would find themselves caught between two forces working as one. The Admiral studied the plan. It was bold. It required perfect timing and trust between species that had been killing each other just 6 months ago. But they had no better options. The Kethmer were coming, and nothing else had worked. Queen Zareth-Kai gave the order. The combined fleet would meet the enemy at the Shriven Nebula, a vast cloud of gas and dust where the Kethmer had gathered their forces. It would be the largest battle in the history of both civilizations. Danny transferred his consciousness to the Queen's flagship, the greatest warship the Volanthi had ever built. He stood on the command bridge with his hands pressed against the primary console, ready to coordinate both fleets from the center of the storm. The Shriven Nebula was beautiful and terrifying. Colors swirled through the endless clouds like paint mixing in water. Stars glittered in the distance. And everywhere, filling the darkness between the colors, were ships. Thousands of Kethmer vessels, bristling with weapons, waiting for prey. Danny reached out with his mind and touched every ship in the Allied fleet. Human vessels hummed with familiar energy. Volanthi ships sang in frequencies he had learned to understand. He held them all in his awareness like chess pieces on a board. "Begin," he said. The human fleet struck first. 50 fast cruisers burst from the nebula clouds, weapons blazing. They hit the Kethmer formation like arrows, punching through and pulling back before the enemy could respond. The Kethmer, enraged by the attack, gave chase. Their massive ships pushed forward, hungry for blood. Danny watched through 1,000 sensors as the trap formed. The Kethmer were so focused on the humans that they didn't see the Volanthi fleet waiting behind them. Hundreds of warships, their weapons charged and ready. "Now," Danny commanded. The Volanthi opened fire. The darkness of space lit up with energy beams and explosions. Kethmer ships, caught from behind, tried to turn and fight. But the humans were already coming back, attacking from the front. The enemy fleet was surrounded, crushed between two forces that moved with perfect coordination. Danny processed information faster than any computer. He saw every ship, every weapon, every movement. He issued orders in 2 languages to commanders light years apart. When a Volanthi cruiser took damage, he rerouted power from 3 human ships to cover its retreat. When a human destroyer found itself surrounded, he directed Volanthi gunships to break through and save them. The battle lasted 6 hours. It felt like 6 years. Danny's body trembled with exhaustion, but his mind stayed sharp. He refused to let a single ship fall that could be saved. He refused to waste a single life that didn't need to be lost. When it was over, the Kethmer fleet was broken. 40% of their ships had been destroyed. The survivors scattered into the darkness, running for the first time in their long history of conquest. Danny released his hold on the networks and collapsed. Guards caught him before he hit the floor. His nose was bleeding. His eyes were bloodshot. But he was smiling. Queen Zarethkai stood over him as medics rushed to help. She looked at this small human who had just commanded the greatest victory her people had ever seen. "You did it," she said softly. "You actually did it." Danny looked up at her, barely conscious. "We did it. Humans and Volanthi, together." The Queen was silent for a moment. Then she did something that shocked everyone on the bridge. She knelt beside him, her massive form folding down until they were almost face to face. "I was wrong about your kind," she admitted. "I thought humans were weak because they broke easily. I did not understand that breaking is how you learn. Struggle is how you grow. Your short lives force you to become something we never needed to be. You adapt. You survive. You become more." Danny managed a weak laugh. "Is that a compliment?" "It is the truth," Zarethkai said. "And the truth is that you terrify me, Danny Carter. Not because of what you are, but because of what humanity might become." Danny closed his eyes as exhaustion finally claimed him. But even in the darkness, he could feel it. Something had changed. The war was not over yet, but the tide had turned, and 2 species that had once been enemies were learning to become something greater.